The envelope was sitting on my desk when I got back from lunch, and my coworker was looking at me the way people look at someone who doesn't know something is about to happen to them. It was a plain white envelope. My name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address. My coworker said, "It came by courier. The guy waited to make sure you got it personally." And then she found somewhere else to be, the way people do when they don't want to be nearby when something lands. I should explain who I am, or who I thought I was. My name is Meredith. I'm 32 years old. I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Portland, Oregon, which is a job that sounds impressive until you explain what it actually involves, which is mostly organizing other people's paperwork so they can take credit for it in court. I'm good at it. I am methodical and quiet, and I have a very high tolerance for reading documents that other people find unbearable. My stepfather always said that was the only useful thing about me. His name is Kenneth. He married my mother when I was 4 years old, 2 years after my biological father died in a construction accident that left us with nothing except a small life insurance payout that my mother said she used for rent. Kenneth came with a house in a suburb outside of Portland and 2 kids from his first marriage, a boy named Scott and a girl named Heather, who were 9 and 11, and who treated me the way older kids treat a stray that wandered into the yard, not cruelly, exactly, but without any real interest in whether I stayed or went. Kenneth was different. Kenneth had an interest in me. Not the warm kind, the kind that keeps something close because it's useful. He was a financial advisor. He wore the right watches and said the right things at dinner parties and had a way of explaining complicated things slowly, like he was doing you a favor just by talking to you. When I was in high school, he told me I wasn't college material. When I applied anyway and got into the University of Oregon, he said, "You'll drop out inside a year." I didn't drop out. I finished in 4 years and paid for most of it myself through work study and loans that I'm still paying down. I moved out at 22. He shook my hand at the door, which I have since learned means something specific about a person. People who shake your hand when you leave their house, after 18 years, don't think of you as family. They think of you as a transaction that's closing. My mother had died when I was 20. A stroke, fast and without warning, the kind the doctor said she probably didn't even feel. I was a sophomore. I took 1 semester off and then went back because I didn't know what else to do, and because staying in that house with Kenneth felt like a slow disappearance. We were polite to each other at holidays after that. He sent a card when I graduated. I sent one when Scott got married. That was the shape of what we had. I thought about my biological father sometimes. Not often. I had almost no memories of him. I was 4 when he died, just the feeling of being carried. A voice that was low and warm, the smell of sawdust. My mother didn't talk about him much. She said it hurt too much. Kenneth didn't talk about him at all. The one time I brought it up, when I was maybe 14, Kenneth said, "Your father was a good man who made a bad bet. Some people aren't built for this world." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. The envelope. I opened it at my desk, alone, after my coworker had gone back to her office. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, typed, no letterhead. It said, "My name is Owen Aldace. I am a private investigator. I have been retained by a client who believes you may be a person they have been searching for. I would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. This is not a solicitation, a scam, or anything alarming." I understand that sounds like something a scammer would say. I can provide credentials and references from the Portland Police Bureau on request. Please. Call, a phone number. That was it. I sat with that piece of paper for 4 days. I didn't call. I Googled him. Owen Aldace was real. Licensed PI, 15 years in practice, former investigator with the Oregon Department of Justice. The references he'd mentioned were verifiable. His website was minimal and professional and had no stock photos of people in trench coats, which I took as a good sign. On the 5th day I called, he picked up immediately. He was careful with me in a way that felt practiced but not unkind. He said he had been hired by a woman named Caroline Ostroff. He said she lived in Tucson, Arizona. He said she was 61 years old. He said she had a daughter born on April 9, 1992, at a hospital in Tempe, Arizona, who had been placed in a private adoption through an agency that had since lost its operating license, and that she had been trying for 11 years to locate this daughter and had reached a dead end on every conventional avenue until she'd hired him. "I'm 32, I said. "Yes," he said. "My birthday is April 9th. A pause. "I know. That's why I'm calling you. I had been adopted. That was not news to me. My mother, the woman who raised me, had told me when I was 8, matter of factly, the way you tell children things you don't want to become a big secret. She said she and my father had adopted me as an infant and loved me completely. She said my biological mother had been young and hadn't been able to care for me. She said there was nothing sad about it, that it was a practical thing and a loving thing, and I should never feel anything but good about who I was. I had felt mostly good about it. I had also spent every year of my adult life filling out medical history forms with unknown, next to the questions about hereditary conditions, cardiovascular history, cancer, and the 30 other things doctors need to know that I could never answer. It was a low-grade absence, the kind you get used to. I told Owen Aldous I would need time to think. He said, "Of course, I just need you to know that Caroline has been looking for a long time. She's not in a rush. She just wants to know you're okay." I thought about that for a week. Someone wanting to know I was okay. That was a thing you could want from a stranger, it turned out. That was a thing I apparently needed to hear. I had already ordered a DNA kit 3 months earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this. My doctor had flagged something in a routine blood panel. Nothing alarming, but she wanted more context on my family history, and I had nothing to give her. The kit was the obvious move. I sent it, got the results, and had been sitting with the ethnicity breakdown ever since without really looking at the Family Matches tab. Because looking at the Family Matches tab felt like opening a door. I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. I opened the door. There was a close match. The site classified it as parent or child. The name on the profile was Margot L., and the only information listed was that she lived in Arizona and had opted in for family contact. I messaged her on a Tuesday. I said, "I think we might be connected. I'm not sure what I'm looking for exactly. I just thought you should know I was here." She replied within the hour, "I know exactly who you are. I've been looking for you since 2003. I think you might be my daughter." I called Owen Aldous back. What followed was 3 weeks of the most surreal administrative experience of my life. A second test, lab certified, through a genetics department at OHSU that a former professor connected me with. A conversation with a social worker who specialized in adult adoptee reunification. Calls with Caroline, careful and slow, both of us handling the thing like it might break. She had a voice that was dry and warm, at the same time, like the desert, and she laughed at the same places I would have laughed, which unnerved me in a way I couldn't fully explain. The certified lab results came back on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the parking garage of my building when my phone buzzed. I sat in my car and read them 3 times. 99.997%. Parent-child relationship confirmed. I sat in that parking garage for 45 minutes. Then I went back inside and filed a brief and answered 14 emails and ordered a salad I didn't eat, because that's what you do when something enormous happens on a Wednesday in the middle of the workday. You keep going until you can stop. That night, I finally let myself do what I had been avoiding. I called my stepfather. I had spent the previous 3 weeks, in between everything else, pulling everything I could find on Kenneth in the way only a paralegal with a decade of experience and access to legal research databases can. I was not looking for anything specific. I was looking the way you look when something feels wrong and you can't articulate why yet. What I found took me 4 days to understand and 2 more days to accept. My adoptive parents, my mother and my biological father, had used an agency called Pacific Family Connections to complete my adoption in 1992. The agency had lost its license in 2001 under findings that included falsified placement records. undisclosed financial arrangements with birth families, and, in at least 4 cases, documentation that had been altered to conceal the identity of the child being placed. The agency's primary legal representative listed in its incorporation documents was a firm called Hessler and Associates. Kenneth had worked at Hessler and Associates from 1989 to 1997 as a junior associate. His specialty was estate and family law. I found this on a Thursday afternoon, and then I sat very still for a long time. Kenneth had known my biological mother. I couldn't prove the shape of what that meant yet, but I knew the outline. A 20-year-old woman in Tempe, Arizona, in 1992, placed through an agency represented by a firm where Kenneth worked, placed with a couple who happened to be connected to Kenneth through his wife's family. My mother had mentioned once, years ago, that Kenneth had been the one who found the agency for them, that he had come to her with it, after she and my biological father had been struggling to adopt through conventional channels for over a year. Kenneth had found the agency. Kenneth's firm represented the agency, and somewhere in the paperwork that the agency had falsified before losing its license, the trail of where I had come from had been quietly and efficiently buried. I needed someone who was better at this than I was. Her name was Priya Sandhu. She was an attorney in Portland who specialized in civil fraud litigation, and a former colleague of mine had used her 3 years earlier when a contractor had defrauded her entire building's HOA fund. She was small and precise, and had the particular quality of people who are very good at their jobs, which is that they say things once and they don't repeat themselves for emphasis. I went to her office on a Friday morning, and I told her everything. She listened without writing anything down, which I later learned was a thing she did when she was building the whole picture in her head before she decided which pieces were important. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What you're describing," she said, "is that a licensed attorney, employed by a firm that represented a private adoption agency, may have facilitated a placement that was designed to obscure the biological family's identity while maintaining a financial or personal relationship with the child's placement family, and that the same individual subsequently entered into a personal relationship with the child's adoptive mother and became that child's de facto guardian." "When you say it like that," I said, "the adoption records, if they were falsified, would be a matter for the Oregon Department of Justice and potentially the Arizona Attorney General's office, since the placement originated there. We would also be looking at whether any financial benefit accrued to him as a result of the placement or its concealment. Was there a financial relationship between your biological mother and the agency?" I said I didn't know. Priya said, "Let's find out." What we found over the next 3 weeks was this. Caroline had been 19 years old in 1992 and had come from a family with money. Not substantial wealth, but real and documented. Her father had owned a small chain of hardware stores in Arizona that he had sold in 1994, and the family had maintained a trust in his name. At the time of the adoption, Caroline had signed documents releasing her parental rights. And also, buried in the paperwork that her own attorney had told her was standard, an agreement releasing any claim to financial support from the agency or affiliated parties in exchange for what was described as placement assistance fees that amounted to $12,000, paid directly to Pacific Family Connections. $12,000 in 1992, paid to an agency Kenneth's firm represented. And Kenneth had steered my mother toward that agency specifically. I still don't know if it was greed or if it was something else, a debt, a favor, a relationship I'll never have the full picture of. The federal investigators, who became involved later, had their own theories. What I know is what I can prove, which is what Priya taught me to hold on to. I didn't want to do what came next. I want to be honest about that. Kenneth had been terrible to me in the specific grinding way of people who are consistent about it. Never dramatic enough to be obviously villainous, just steady, year after year, with the small erosions. "You were never college material. You're not one of us. Your father made a bad bet. I had built a life anyway, but I had built it in spite of him. And some part of me had always believed. The way children believe things that get said to them enough, that the spite was more evidence than the accomplishment. I did not want to be the person who ended up in a room with him, presenting documentation of what he had done. I wanted to forward it all to Priya and let the legal process be a thing that happened somewhere else, to someone else. While I went back to organizing other people's paperwork, but Priya said there were things that only I could do, things that required me to be present, and Caroline asked me quietly over the phone one evening if I would be willing to be in the room. And when she asked like that, carefully, like she was terrified of pressuring me, I said yes. The meeting was held at Priya's office. Kenneth arrived with an attorney I'd never seen, a man who looked like he had been interrupted in the middle of something more important. Kenneth himself looked exactly as he always had, gray at the temples, good posture, the expression of someone who has never in his life felt that he owed anyone an explanation. He saw me and he said, "Meredith, I thought this was about your mother's estate." "It is partly," Priya said. "Please sit down." She walked him through the documents methodically. Pacific Family Connections, Hessler and Associates, the payment records, the falsified placement files, the trail from the agency's closure to the records that had survived in the Oregon Dode's archives, which Priya had spent considerable effort locating. She presented it the way a paralegal does, actually, which is to say clearly and without drama, because the facts are dramatic enough without any help. Kenneth's attorney started talking about statute of limitations. Priya smiled pleasantly. Fraudulent concealment tolls the statute. The plaintiff's clock doesn't start until discovery, which in this case is recent. Kenneth was quiet. He had been quiet for most of it, which was unusual. He was not, in my experience, a quiet man. He was a man who filled rooms. Then he looked at me, not at the attorneys, at me, and he said, "Whatever you think happened, your mother and I gave you a stable home. You had opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise. I'm not sure what you think you're going to accomplish here." I had thought about this moment. I had imagined it many ways. I had imagined saying something precise and devastating. I had imagined saying nothing, just sliding a document across the table. I had imagined staying very calm. What I actually did was take out my phone and play him a voicemail. Caroline had recorded it for me after our third phone call. She said, "I don't know if you'll ever need this. I just want you to have it." Her voice on the recording was steady, the way it got when she was controlling something carefully. She said, "If you're listening to this, I need you to know that I spent 11 years looking for you, not because of anything legal, not because of money, not for any reason except that you were my daughter. And I was 20 years old and someone told me I had no other options. And I have never, not for one single day, believed that giving you up was what I actually wanted. I just didn't know, at 19, that what I wanted was allowed to matter." The room was quiet. Kenneth's attorney put his pen down. "The financial recovery we're pursuing," Priya said, into the silence, "includes the original fees paid to Pacific Family Connections, treble damages under Oregon's civil fraud statutes, and compensation for the concealment of my client's biological identity over 3 decades. We're also in contact with the Arizona Attorney General's office, which has an interest in the original placement documentation. And the Oregon State Bar is reviewing Kenneth's bar membership, given that the conduct in question occurred while he was a licensed associate." Kenneth said nothing. I said, "I know you thought you were untouchable. I've been watching you think that my whole life. I will not tell you it felt as good as I had imagined it would. It felt like something finished, like a piece of furniture that had been in the wrong place finally moved." The room was quieter and stranger after, and I drove home and sat in my apartment with my dog, a beagle named Huck who has no opinions about legal proceedings, and I ordered Thai food and cried a little, and then fell asleep watching something forgettable on TV. The legal process was not fast. I want to say that clearly, because the part of this story people want is the part where justice happens decisively, and that is not how any of it worked. Kenneth's bar membership was suspended pending investigation 6 weeks after the meeting. The civil case moved through the Oregon courts slowly, with motions and continuances and long stretches of waiting. The Arizona AG's office opened its own inquiry into Pacific Family Connections' surviving records, which connected 2 other placements with similar irregularities. Other people were affected by this. Other people were looking. I can't speak for their stories. Caroline flew to Portland in October. I had asked her to wait until after the preliminary hearing because I needed the legal piece to have its own space. I didn't want them to collapse into each other. She understood without me having to explain it twice, which I was already learning was a thing about her. I picked her up at PDX on a Thursday afternoon. I had told myself to manage my expectations. I had done a lot of reading about adult adoptee reunification, that it's complicated, that you can love someone and also feel grief and anger and strangeness all at the same time, that you don't have to feel immediately whole just because a missing piece shows up. She came through the arrival's doors in a blue rain jacket that was completely wrong for Portland weather, which is to say exactly right. She was shorter than I expected. She had dark hair, going gray and brown eyes, and when she saw me, she stopped walking completely, just to stopped in the middle of the corridor, and people had to move around her. She said, "You look exactly like my mother." Exactly. Her voice was not steady this time. We stood there for a minute, the 2 of us, in the way of everyone's rolling suitcases. And then she laughed a little, and I laughed a little, and we hugged the way you hug someone you've known for a long time and not seen in a while, except we had known each other for 32 years, in the way of people who share something at the cellular level. I have an aunt. Her name is Beverly, and she is Caroline's older sister, and she makes tamales at Christmas and has very strong opinions about reality television, and called me the day after Caroline got home to tell me that I sounded just like their mother on the phone, and then cried for 10 minutes. I have a grandfather who is 83 and lives in a retirement community outside of Tucson and still drives himself to the grocery store on Tuesdays, and who, when we video called for the first time, said, "Well, you've got the Ostroff forehead. Nothing to be done about that." He seemed pleased. I have a family medical history now. This sounds small. It is not small. I went back to my doctor with 4 pages of information, and she said, "Finally." Like she'd been waiting. I still work at the law firm. I still organize other people's paperwork. I have decided I don't mind that job the way I used to mind it. It turned out to be exactly the skill set I needed when it mattered most, and there's something clarifying about that, about competence being the thing that saves you. Kenneth's civil case is ongoing. I check in with Priya when there's an update and try not to check in otherwise. She bills by the hour. Scott and Heather reached out through text, separate texts, not coordinated, which I thought was interesting. Scott said he wanted to explain. Heather said she was sorry. I haven't responded to either of them yet. I'm still deciding what I want that to look like, or if I want it to look like anything at all. There is something I keep coming back to. When I was 12, I found a folder in Kenneth's home office. I was looking for printer paper, something completely mundane, and the folder was in the cabinet above the printer, labeled in his handwriting with just my mother's name and a year, the year of the adoption. I opened it. Inside was a copy of my original placement agreement and a photograph. A young woman I didn't recognize, dark-eyed and laughing, holding an infant, and something handwritten on the back that I couldn't quite make out because I heard Kenneth on the stairs and put the folder back and told myself I'd imagined what I thought I'd seen. I had not imagined it. I know that now. The handwriting said April 9th, Meredith, placed successfully in Kenneth's handwriting, and the woman in the photograph was 20 years old and laughing. Because she didn't know yet what the word successfully was going to cost her. When Priya subpoenaed Kenneth's documents, the folder was still in the cabinet. The photograph was still inside. Caroline identified herself immediately. She said, "That's from the hospital. I don't know how he had that." She said it quietly. in the particular tone of someone doing the math. The photograph is mine now. I had it scanned and printed at a real photo lab, good paper, and I put it in a frame on my bookshelf between a photo of my adoptive mother, who was kind, who was real, who I loved and who loved me, who I believe knew nothing of any of this, and who I have decided to protect in my own memory, regardless of what the documents say. And a photo of Caroline and me from the day she visited Portland, standing on the Hawthorne Bridge with the river behind us, both of us squinting into the sun. Huck is in that photo too, trying to put his paw on Caroline's knee. She sent me a rain jacket last week. It's better than hers. There was a note inside that said, "For next time and nothing else." I have been to Tucson twice now. I know which chair is most comfortable in her kitchen and how she takes her coffee and the name of the podcast she listens to while she does the dishes. I know that she hums when she drives, quietly, like she's keeping a tune to herself. My mother hummed too, my adoptive mother, just slightly off-key, like she was chasing the right note. I have been thinking about that, about how love is a practice, something learned and repeated, about how my mother learned how to love me from whatever she was before I came along, and I learned how to love from watching her, and neither of us knew the shape of what I'd been missing until the shape showed up and fit the way shapes fit when they were always supposed to go together. I know who I am now. My name is Meredith Ostroff. I am 32 years old. I have my great-grandmother's forehead, apparently, and a dog who doesn't care about any of this, and a grandfather who still drives himself to the grocery store, and an aunt who has strong opinions about reality television, and a mother who flies to Portland in the wrong jacket and sends me the right one in the mail a week later. For the first time in my life, I am not filling in the blanks with nothing. I know exactly what goes there.